that, and we're not going to allow ourselves to have that common lexicon with this whole segment of the world, because we dislike the trappings of these stories. So what I'd like to talk with you a little bit about here is engaging with things on their own terms, and what kind of case can we make for what kind of tools can we give the more conservative among Christians to kind of be able to get over the initial maybe distaste or discomfort that they might have,
or distrust.
Distrust, I think, is a really good term, for what a lot of people feel towards the fantastical.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big thing. I mean, my entire podcast, More Than One Lesson, is kind of about this. It certainly started from this. And I think it is fascinating the amount of things that we bring into the theater with us that might have to do with the movie, or it doesn't. It could be an actor's political views. Sure. That happens a lot in the conservative world. Like, George Clooney, we know he's a liberal, or Matt Damon, or whatever it is. And so I can't tell you the number of times that I've read the conservatives say, like, I'm not going to see any of his movies ever again, right, because I don't want to give that money. And I'll get to the fantasy thing in a moment and the more Christian side of it. But from the conservative side, which I am, we approach film and art the way we approach everything else, which is from a free market standpoint, which is this isn't what I like, so I will send a message by not giving it money. Now, everybody does it, but for us especially, that's how we know, that's how we indicate that something is working or is not working. And we approach art the same way. It's like, well, this movie either says something I don't like, or the director has said something that I don't like, or just in general, like, I don't like Hollywood, like stuff that doesn't really have anything to do with this particular story or the way that it's told. And so we treat it like it was just a pair of shoes. That's the thing I've been saying lately. And it's just like, oh, this doesn't really fit, so I'm not going to wear it. That makes perfect sense with a pair of shoes. Right. Art is different. Art is not a commodity. Yes, you do pay money for it. And yes, a lot of them, you can very cynically say, are made to make money. But when it comes right down to it, art is communication. It is a completely other person. It could be an author. It could be a painter. It could be a director, whatever. A completely other person communicating their view of the world to you. And sometimes it's very clear, like somebody writing an essay, which may not necessarily be art, but let's say a poem. It could be more overt, like a poem, or it could be kind of hidden in a story. Either way, it's they have lived a life, and we don't necessarily know what that is, but they've lived a life that has caused them to either have certain questions or come to certain conclusions, and those are burning within them. That sounds very dramatic, but it can be that way, and they need to express it in some way, in a creative way. They want to do it in a way that is more than just saying everything. Yes. And for conservatives to... And I'll also say that many of these artists tend to lean to the left for whatever reason. It's just the way it goes. And for conservatives to just cut that off because these people lean to the left, it's like you are cutting yourself off from any point of view now at this point. I understand you don't want to give it money. That's unfortunate. But you know what? If you're going to engage with other human beings, which increasingly people don't want to, left or right, but... if you're going to do this, then it costs money. I'm sorry. That's the way it works. And you may not like it, but at least you saw it. At least you know what it is you're not liking. Right. Or sometimes you can be surprised. Sometimes you go in and all these liberals wind up making a movie that's accidentally or maybe overtly conservative in its message. Maybe they do it in a way that they don't even realize, but conservatives know it. And so that's when, the other side, like, we need all points of view sometimes to really get at the root of what a filmmaker is doing, because sometimes even the filmmaker might not even realize what they're doing themselves. And so, like, it's just for conservatives to just, like I said, to just cut themselves off. Roger Ebert said that a movie is a machine that generates empathy. And I'd say art in general does that, but movies especially. And ultimately we're saying, like, we don't want to empathize with someone we don't agree with.
Yeah. And when you put it in those terms, like that succinctly, like, that is clearly not a Christian perspective to have.
Right. Yes. Yeah, and I do think, and then we get into the other part of it, which is distrust. And so on one hand, there's the political part of it, and on the other, there's the spiritual. There's the idea that, like, we need to be careful. We need to, a common phrase is guard our hearts. That's a thing. We need to try to think about good things. We need to focus on God's blessings and that sort of thing. Which is fine. I think that's a good thing, and I think it's also good to understand your own convictions and the things that can trouble your soul, and the things that just rob you of hope.
Yeah.
And it does happen. There are certain movies that I don't see either because of personal moral convictions, or because it's just like, hey, you know what, that might be a great movie. And this doesn't happen so much anymore because I do the film critic thing. I feel like I need to see as much stuff as possible, regardless of how I might feel going in. But my dad always had a hard time watching movies about civil rights. Not because he's against civil rights, but because he was so very much in favor of it. And he just had a hard time seeing such inhumanity. Yeah. And it, like, really troubled him. And someone would say, in fact, I did say when I was, a teenager and didn't understand these things, I said, like, yeah, but Dad, like, this is the stuff that really went on, and we need to see it. We need to face it. And he's like, I did. I was alive at that time. And it was terrible. Yeah. And he goes, it's important that we learn lessons from it, but I don't necessarily want to live there again. Right. And so, I think it is important to understand yourself and what you might bring to a viewing experience and what it might bring to you. So with all that in mind, I would say that, you mentioned fantasy. Well, it's like, okay, fantasy, well, magic, well, we see in the Bible, like, there are demons that, like, possess people and they do magic. There are false prophets. There are all these things. And I think it comes from a place of wanting to protect yourself, which is not a bad instinct, but not unlike the conservative thing. Like, you're cutting yourself off from some pretty amazing works of art. Right. And it's like, and everyone's fine. Like, they're always fine with Lord of the Rings. They're always fine with
Narnia,
Chronicles of Narnia. Why? Because they know about the authors.
Because it's safe. They already know what's in there.
Yeah. And because I think there's an attitude amongst Christians that it's impossible for a non-Christian to make a movie or put together a work of art that has that mirrors our own values or our own beliefs. Like, it's impossible. That can't happen. It's like, are you kidding me? There is biblical precedent for God using people without them necessarily knowing they're being used for good things to happen. And I've seen so many films that have brought me closer to God, and not like this weird pagan Hollywood version of God. I mean, like, these films have taken me back into my Bible so that I can connect more with God, because I feel convicted that, like, I'm not doing a certain thing. And undoubtedly the directors never intended that. That's the neat thing about art. It's not always intended.
Here's a great example of that I experienced really recently. I was watching a stand-up comedian, and I can't recommend this at all because it was really crass and very offensive in many ways. And and I'm not sure, really why I continued to watch it after the first few minutes, but there were definitely very funny parts to it. But at the end of it, and it was all, sort of in service of a gag, but at the end of it, there was a moment where the comic was displaying such authentic, like brokenness, really, and like, and talking about how insecure he is with all of the crowds and all of the fame and all of this stuff, and that clear and really moving picture of brokenness and openness, like literally drove me to my knees, like literally. As the credits were rolling, like I had to like bow down and like pray, man, God, could I have that kind of authenticity and be willing to be that vulnerable, to people around me.
Yeah, and that is what art is. It is somebody. I mean, every once in a while you'll find like an actor or a director or a writer, and you can tell they're holding back, that they don't want to be completely vulnerable. They don't want to put themselves out there because it is a risk. You risk looking stupid. You risk looking ugly sometimes. Like if an actor has to cry and just let themselves cry, like nobody cries, in a beautiful way. It's like it's all snot and gross.
Scrunched up faces.
And so, exactly. And so every once in a while you'll find them holding back, and it just feels so wrong. Like we actually do want our art to be as honest as possible. And when it is, it's like, I have nothing in common with this person. We believe completely different things politically, spiritually, whatever it is. They might be 40 years older than me, but at this moment I see their humanity. And I just want to engage with it. I want to hug it. I want to tell it that I understand, even if I don't fully understand. Like that is what art can be. And I would say that's very much, again, a Christian doesn't have to see everything. And I don't think you need to really even see anything, because movies aren't that important for everybody. But if you are interested in something, but you hold back because it's fantasy and you feel like, well, I don't want to let the devil in, again, it's important to know your own sensitivities and that sort of thing. But at the same time, like what do we think it actually means to be in the world but not of it? Like we so focus on the not being of, which I totally get, but what does it mean to be in? Does it mean you don't engage with any of the works of art that everybody else around you is seeing and is informing our culture, and you don't want to know what that is? You don't want to be a part of that conversation?
Then you're Angela from The Office.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, and this is something, like, how far do you think it goes when everyone is talking about a movie or a TV show and the only thing you can bring to the table is, well, I didn't see it.
Right.
That's it.
And that's if you're that kind of person, if you're that kind of person, then that response is the best case scenario. Because if you're a little bit more sanctimonious, well, I didn't see that because I'm a Christian.
Right. And then it's like, and people could say like, oh, okay. Well, back to business, but think of how much, and let's say you saw it and you didn't like it, but now you at least you can verbalize specifics. And maybe you're able to convince somebody that like, oh, you know what? Actually, that message is a little bit damaging. But you can't do that unless you actually know this stuff. Like the idea of just turning our backs is really not going to make any impact at all. So I feel like it's important for us to engage prayerfully with discernment, understanding ourselves both spiritually and emotionally, and move ahead accordingly.
Yep. Awesome. All right. Well, I would love to just like continue to talk with you about this because I think this is fascinating, but our time is limited. So let's go ahead and move into our next part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe rewatch that we're doing on the show. and you requested to